Listen up or run for cover. Dropping knowledge from the people who have it to the people who need it. The real Broadband, Bradley Bombs is dropping.
What it is, Bradley, back again with another episode of Dropping Bombs. Today in the studio, folks, virtually, I assume from Austin, Texas. We'll find out in a moment. I've got a real treat for you. Mike Dillard, welcome to the show, buddy.
It's good to be here, Brad. Thank you for the invite, my man.
Man, it's my pleasure. It's my honor. It's my benefit to have you on the show. I got a bunch of people. When I was on your show, dude, I was like, damn, dude, he must have a lot of listeners. Because, dude, I had a lot of your people blowing me up from that. And I'm like, damn, nice. Dude, this guy's got a lot of followers. So I started checking you out, seeing who you are. I'm like, dude, this guy's got his shit together.
Somewhat. Been doing this a while.
Yeah. So, dude, I'm glad you gave me a little bit of time to share some knowledge with my folks. I call them the Bomb Squad. So if anybody, hashtag Bomb Squad, you'll know what they're coming from.
Awesome.
And folks, if you guys don't know who Mike Dillard is, then you're probably living under a rock, but you can, Google him. He's a serial entrepreneur, basically, living in Austin, Texas. And for a long time, was well known for his book, Magnetic Sponsoring. Was that because you were in network marketing?
I was. I spent my first 5 years as an entrepreneur in that industry. I started in college and failed at it miserably for 5 years. I didn't make a dollar. I did everything that you could possibly do to build a business in that world, and it didn't go well. And then I discovered direct response marketing and copywriting. I learned how to finally sell something, and I learned how to do it online at scale. I ended up writing a book, and that book really introduced the network marketing industry to internet marketing for the first time. And that turned into kind of a sensation. That turned into a $25 million business for me. First business out of the gate, and that really worked once I figured it out. And that's what put me on the map for a good 5 years.
And then what?
I realized about the age of 30 that I was making millions of dollars. I was, up to that point, single and in my 20s, blowing it on really fun stuff like Aston Martins and houses and boats and trips all over the world. And I realized I wasn't saving any of it. I just turned 30. I had no investments. I had no savings, but I was making $400,000 or $500,000, $600,000 a month. And I just said, I'm an idiot. I need to figure out this money side of my life. And so I decided to dive into financial education. That was right around 2008 after the market had crashed. So I saw what not to do. I went to the local bookstore, Book People here in Austin. I went to the finance section. Every book I found was out of date and irrelevant based on what just happened. And so I needed answers, but I didn't know where to find them. And I'd realized, I want to learn how to invest like the rich. I want to learn how to invest like the people who were making money during the crash of 2008 and not losing it. And so I decided to just start a little business in the financial education space. It was a private membership site. And I would interview people like Robert Kiyosaki and people in oil and gas, people in stocks, people in gold and silver, people in real estate. And I just said, teach me how to make money the way that you make it. I want to learn about this stuff. And so I was basically the dummy in that world. I was not the expert. So I still managed to start a business around what I call the Oprah Winfrey model, where I'm just the person interviewing the expert. We did $3.2 million in sales in our first 7 days of that business. It was a $97 a month offer. That grew to $10 million in the first year, $25 million in the course of 2 or 3 years. And after that kind of ran its course, I partnered up with Peter Diamandis. I decided to go into a completely different direction. I was very inspired by him and Elon Musk, and I wanted to try my hand at a physical tech product and to do something as big as I possibly could. I wanted to freaking go for it, all the chips on the table, which is what I ended up doing. So I partnered with a company in Silicon Valley called Whipsaw, and our goal was to decentralize the ag industry. I lived right across the street from Whole Foods in downtown Austin, and every day I'd go over there and I'd buy my organic produce to juice and all of that good stuff. And I realized that you've got to be rich to buy food that isn't going to kill you. And that really kind of pissed me off. And it was also a big problem and an opportunity. And when I started to study the ag industry, because I didn't know a darn thing about it, I've never farmed or grown anything before, I jumped on Amazon, bought every book I could buy on hydroponics and farming. And I realized that if you can decentralize the ag industry and basically get rid of the distribution system, get rid of the farm, the tractor, the farmer, the pesticides, the glyphosates, the 18-wheelers, the distribution centers, and finally the retail center, you can actually cut food costs down by about 90%. So I decided to make that my goal and mission. Again, had no experience in product development. And the goal was let's build a robot basically that you can put in your kitchen that'll grow all of your organic produce for you. You don't need to know anything about it. You just put in a little seed cup, kind of like a Keurig coffee cup, and it does the rest for you. And it started with a few sketches in a notebook, going to Odesk and hiring a Photoshop guy for $100 to put some plants in a Voss water bottle, and then put the Voss water bottle in a kitchen, remove the logo, and then send that concept off to a couple industrial design firms like Whipsaw, which is who I eventually went with. And 3 years later, we had a working prototype in my living room. We're growing food. It's automatically adjusting the pH. It's dosing the nutrients that it needs. It's adjusting the light and the spectrum based on what we're growing. It's got a Wi-Fi antenna and a mobile app. And it almost took me out financially. The original estimate for that business to develop that product was $500,000. So I'm in 3 years now, a couple of $1 million in, and I self-funded all of this. And we've got a prototype, but we're nowhere near production. I'm figuring out how to manufacture and package a product and do safety testing for the first time, paying a very high stupid tax, which is what I call it. And I sat down with the guys and I'm like, okay, how much more is this going to cost and how much longer is this going to take? And they said, well, probably another 2 years and another $2 to $3 million. And then I just stopped because I was running myself into the ground, running an internet marketing business to fund that business at the tune of a couple $100,000 a month. And at the same time, around the same month, a competing company that was out of Y Combinator, so they've got 20 or 30 employees, they've been around 70 years, they've got tens of millions of dollars in VC funding, called Click and Grow, had this little countertop product that would grow 3 plants at a time that I didn't really take seriously because they were missing the mark, in my opinion, meaning it was kind of a nice gimmick, but they weren't replacing your trip to the grocery store. Well, that month they released 3 more products that grew 9 plants, I think 35 plants and 51 plants. And not only that, they had a better methodology to do it because their product was much simpler and it was going to cost about a third that ours would. And so being a marketer, I'm already picturing the side-by-side comparison charts, right? The features and benefits and the costs. And I lost on all of those categories except the looks. Ours was a better looking product. It was cooler, but theirs won in every other way. So here I am 3 years in, millions of dollars in, and I've got to make a decision. Do I go out and raise money from friends and family and VCs and just keep pushing this thing forward? Or do I figure out, something? If you're loyal to the mission, meaning if you're loyal to putting clean food on the table of families around the country and decentralizing the ag industry, does it really matter if you do it or if somebody else does it? And I said, no, it doesn't really matter if somebody else does it. And they said, well, why don't you call up Click and Grow and see if you guys can work together? So that's what I did. I called up Matthias and introduced myself to the founder. And originally I wanted to do a licensing deal where I would license my design to them. They were already way down their design path, so that wasn't a good fit. But they did have a bridge round open from an investment standpoint. So I put 6 figures into them very early, I think right after their A round was raised or maybe pre-A. And they're crushing it now. It's been 3 or 4 years since I made that investment. They're growing like crazy. They're raising their B or C round at tens of millions of dollars, doing business all over the world. And there's a very good chance that I'll make back everything that I put into EverGrow, which was the name of the system at the time, and then some. But it was a very humbling thing to do because I had involved my audience throughout this process the entire time. I've been showing them pictures of the prototype and videos and pre-selling people on becoming a customer. And failing as an entrepreneur is something we all do, but failing in a very public way in front of an audience of hundreds of thousands of people is something that I've never had to experience before. And that's something I had to do for the first time. So I ended up producing about a 30-minute long video talking to my audience about the story from beginning to end with one goal, which was, hey, this didn't turn out the way that I wanted, but at least you guys can learn from it. I certainly did. And maybe this will serve y'all in your ventures moving forward. Put that video on YouTube. It's got, 50, 60, 70,000 views now. And that was the end of that story. So that's been the progression: magnetic sponsoring to the Elevation Group to EverGrow, and then now, figuring out essentially what the next chapter is going to look like.
Which one was with Peter Diamandis?
That was EverGrow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what'd he say?
Peter was awesome. He was on the board. I gave him some equity just to do something with him and be a part of Abundance 360 and his ecosystem. And he was along the same lines of, it doesn't really matter of who does it. The whole point is, if it gets done at the end of the day, that's it. And it doesn't need to be about ego, and other things. And if there's a way for you to partner up and both win, and you don't have to be the one, killing yourself from a stress and anxiety standpoint every day to do the work, even better. So yeah, that was it.
Good. Before we get into another thing I want to talk about with you, I want to give knowledge to the Bomb Squad on how to learn marketing. You don't have to teach them marketing. Obviously, we don't have time for that. But when people ask me, a lot of youngsters follow me for some reason. I think they think I'm funny, but at the end of the day, when they ask me, what should I get into? I always say, learn how to market. Because marketing, like, again, everybody that, and then I started making millions. It's like, well, what'd you learn? Well, I learned how to market. I learned how to drive leads on social media. I learned how to, funnels and this and that. How does someone go learn marketing?
I'm the poster child for that, because I was the absolute worst nightmare for a mentor or, a coach at the time when I was getting started, because I was in high school and college, a hardcore introvert, very shy, not a lot of confidence, and yet highly ambitious when it came to starting a business. And so I would do everything that I possibly could to figure out how to make money without selling something, which doesn't work. And so for me, it really came down to doing two things. I finally did whatever I had to do in order to get over my fear. And I heard something from Tony Robbins that basically said, sometimes we're unwilling to do for ourselves what we're willing to do for other people. Meaning, I might be scared to pick up and call leads from, for myself, but if I were hired and I got a job and I had a boss, maybe I'd be willing to do it for him. And I think that's really true in a lot of circumstances. So I gave that a shot, and I ended up getting a job in Dallas, Texas, right out of school, selling broadband internet services to high-rises in downtown Dallas. And it was the absolute scariest thing that I could possibly do. Take someone who's scared of selling and put them in a territory that's 100% commission-based job and say, go knock on doors until you get kicked out. And that's exactly what I did, with one single goal in mind, which was to get over that fear of selling. I didn't want that job. So for me, it was just a learning tool and a learning opportunity. So I did that for a couple of months. I'd walk into an elevator. I'd have to sneak past security in the buildings in downtown in Dallas. I would usually pretend to be on my old flip phone at the time or something along those lines and just glance at the security guard and keep walking. Take the elevator to the top, start knocking on doors, had no idea what to say, would usually mess it up. Don't think I ever sold anything until security would come and get me and kick me out. And again, I did that for a couple of months and got rid of my fear of selling in front of people. I did the same thing again right after that. I got a job recruiting surgeons in Dallas. They'd sit me down at an empty cubicle with nothing but a phone and a giant 5-ring binder, 3-ring binder, probably 5 inches high. And they said, you've got to call doctor's offices, get past the gatekeeper, and we're going to try and recruit the surgeons into locum tenens work, kind of temporary work. Your goal is 300 dials a day. Go. And here's someone who's deathly scared of calling people on the phone, but I picked up the phone and I made 300 calls a day. And within 2 days, I was over a fear of the phone that had held me back for 5 or 6 years. So that's what I was willing to do to pursue the entrepreneur dream and desire that I had. Those are the two things that finally got me through those two fears that had held me back. And then, finally, I learned that I could write and take those concepts of selling, put them in writing. And at the time, the network marketing industry specifically, most of the biggest earners were doing their sales over the phone, but they were maxed out in capacity, right? They could only make so many phone calls a day if they were half hour, an hour each, maybe 10 people a day tops. They might make, if they were awesome, 40 or 50% conversion rate, 4 or 5 sales. And that was it. And I was like, well, what if I took their scripts and essentially what they were doing and I put it in a written website form and I just sent my traffic there, and that could do all the telling and selling for me. And then I would just pick up the phone call to take the order and, put a call to action. Here's my number, or send me an email. Maybe that would work better. And so I did that. I taught myself how do you do Google AdWords, how to design a capture page, how to, throw up a sales letter. And all of a sudden, I realized I could now put that sales presentation in front of thousands of people a day instead of 10 or 20 without having to talk to anybody 24/7. And so I instantly shot past every one of those earners in those companies, became the number one earner in that particular opportunity that I was in at the time. And that was that. And once I figured out internet marketing, you really very quickly figure out that network marketing is not the best business to be in. Once you acquire this skill set, it's a lot more profitable if you decide to build your own company instead of somebody else's as a distributor. But sales is everything. I don't know how you build a business without mastering sales. So the question is, how is your brain wired? What's your personality type? Do you love to hustle and sell on the phone or in front of an audience off of a stage, or are you more introverted? Would you be more comfortable recording videos, webinars, or writing emails like I was? Doesn't really matter which. The bottom line is you got to do it, because nothing's going to happen until money's exchanged.
So if someone were thinking, that's my problem, I need to figure it out. I'm right where you used to be. You would just say, basically, face your fears, go get some work doing what you're afraid of. But you said, I discovered I knew how to learn, or I knew how to write. Where's a resource where someone that doesn't necessarily know how to write, where would you direct them to go learn how to write copy?
The secret to learning how to write copy is to go find, these days, the best sales videos that are converting, because you're seeing ads for them everywhere. A lot of them are webinars, and to have them transcribed, through a site like rev.com, and write them out by hand. And so that's the secret. If you want to get into books and stuff too, everything Dan Kennedy's ever written is awesome. Gary Halbert. There's all kinds of copywriting products, online that you can buy. But writing the letters out by hand is something I did for about a year, every single night for an hour or two. And what that's going to do is it's going to internalize the storytelling framework. It's going to internalize the vocabulary, the transitions, the changes in the story and in the narrative, the phrases that are used, the simplicity of the language and the sentence structure. And it's kind of like learning how to play music. Someone can sit here and you can read a book about how to play the guitar, but it's not going to really do anything for you until you actually pick up the instrument and you start to play it, and you start to play songs and mimic those songs. And that's how I learned how to play guitar in college, was just listening to freaking Dave Matthews, right? And figuring out the chords and learning how to play the music and get the rhythm. And copywriting is the same way. And the analogy that I'll use for folks is, I don't know about you, Brad, but whenever I'm around somebody that has, they're from a different country and they have a different type of language or an accent, I'll instantly start to mimic that accent within a few minutes of talking to them. And then I'll get kind of embarrassed about it and think like, why am I talking with this weird accent all of a sudden? And that happens every time I'm around somebody with one. And that's, I think, going to be a common experience for a lot of people. But that's your brain picking up on patterns. We're very pattern-centric creatures. And the fastest way to pick up on the patterns of copywriting and sales is to write those successful scripts that have made tens of millions of dollars out by hand, and your brain's just going to absorb it. And before you know it, you're going to be able to write copy and sales copy like I can today. I don't even remember the formulas. It just comes out. It's just a natural way of writing and thinking for me today. But that was the single biggest shortcut that I really took advantage of when I was learning.
Do you think that the copy today is different than it was a few years ago, even a few years ago? The reason I say that is because I see this long form copy. I can identify it as soon as I see it. Oh, there's one of those letters. And it's got to be something new. Like, does it still work? Those old long form?
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. So social media has thrown a wrench in this for sure. And what I'll say is that it's not whether it's long or short, it's time. And so sales is a matter of know, like, and trust. Sales ultimately is about trust. If someone feels safe with you, they're really going to be willing to buy from you quite easily. If they don't feel safe yet, well, then you've got to earn that trust. And so in the past, before we had things like social media, long form copy was necessary because we would have to take a complete stranger through the entire psychology and framework of becoming a buyer, and ideally a single setting, because we just didn't have the kind of follow-up technology that we do today. Now, that copy still works today, and it is actually still necessary if you're talking to someone who's never seen you before. I tend to think of it takes about an hour of dedicated content consumption from a prospect to purchase at least $1,000 in goods from you, which is it's no coincidence. The average webinar is around 90 minutes to 2 hours to sell a $2,000 product. My webinars are typically 90 minutes and it sells a $1,500 product. So for every hour that someone spends with you, they'll typically be willing to spend $1,000 on your products or services. Now, what's happened is with social media and with podcasts is we now have the opportunity to take that hour of consumption and break it down into micro consumption sessions. 15-second story on Instagram, a 5-minute video on YouTube, a 30-minute session on a podcast. And so we'll hit that hour point, along those lines. And now that long form copy, an hour and a half long webinar isn't necessary. Now you can really just go for the offer. And it could be a 5-minute pitch, a 10-minute video, a super short sales page. But at the end of the day, it's time. And how can you get time in front of people to build trust so that they will feel comfortable buying from you? And those are the two ways to do it.
Next question. Which is the best book? You said you started reading a lot of books to figure out this financial game. Which was the best book that you found?
Gosh, on the financial side, everything that Robert Kiyosaki wrote was great. I subscribe to every financial education product, and newsletter out there, everything from Agora, everything from Stansberry Research, everything from Motley Fool. And I just wanted to get a general understanding of it. But one of the most valuable lessons that I learned was that investing really comes down to knowledge and experience. The ROI that you get is going to come down to experience and inside information, just with like anything else in life. And so I got really interested in investing in cash flow real estate, and I had two options at that time. I could either spend the next 3 to 5 years of my life figuring out cash flow real estate, which would not be a good use of my time because I was running a business making millions of dollars a year. Seems like a bad transition to make. Or I could go find the best people in the world who do nothing but cash flow real estate investing and write them a check. And so that was one of the single most valuable lessons that I ever learned, was to invest in expertise and not necessarily an asset. And so I wrote checks to my friends JP and Adrian here in Austin. They run a firm called Thrive FP. They've done nothing but multifamily real estate investing for a couple of decades now. Some of the best in the world at what they do. And I write them 6-figure checks, and they go invest in apartment complexes for me here in Austin or in San Antonio. And then, a lot of times we make back 30, 40% a year return. I could never do that on my own. And it's a hell of a lot easier to let them go do that. And so for me, the investing game has really come down to establishing a base level of education so that I can speak the language, know what they're talking about, and have the general understanding of what's taking place. And then spend some time to go find the best people in the world at that particular investment type and to write those folks a check.
I've been forgetting to drop bombs. That's one of the best things that I've heard, that I can tell people as well. Like, you hear there's no shortcuts in life. Well, there's a ton of shortcuts, and that's just one of them. See, too many people
100%.
think that as we're raised, we're told, you got to do hard work. Well, again, what do you consider hard? Back breaking, blisters on the hands. That's not true. The hardest working people are usually the brokest people. And there's no shortcuts in life, man. Yes, there is shortcuts in life. Why are you telling everyone there's no shortcuts? The shortcut is exactly what you just described. You know, you could have went and did it the hard way. You could have went and, you know, put in the work like we're told, and ended up not making 30 to 40%, making all the mistakes those people had already made more than likely and learned. And you capitalized just by giving them your money and riding on their expertise. So folks, pay attention, man. This is you talk to anybody successful, I guarantee you, they're going to tell you there are shortcuts in life. So stop believing that there's not. And the shortcuts usually boil down to seeking expertise, investing in expertise, you know. But sounds like you've had a lot of, you know, good knowledge put into you, or you learned. How did you like kind of learn this? Did you learn the hard way, or did you kind of just naturally do it?
All the above. I've made tens of millions of dollars. I've lost tens of millions of dollars. I've had super successful companies. I've had companies that didn't make it, like EverGrow. At the end of the day, for me, I just don't want to go through and be, you know, at the age of 80 and regretting not going for it. The nice part about making money is once you learn how to make it, it's a skill that nobody can take away from you, and you can just do it again and again and again. With that being said, at 42 now, I've now come to a stage in life where I've taken all of these huge chances, all my chips on the table a couple of times now. And looking back, would I do that again or recommend somebody else do that again? Probably not. I think there's smarter ways that I could have gone about that. And learning from some other mentors, like Keith Cunningham wrote a fantastic book. Gosh, what's the name of it? If you could have maybe Jeff there, look it up real quick. Or I think it's The Road Less Stupid. It's a fantastic book. And basically Keith has a similar track record, lifelong entrepreneur, tons of successes, tons of failures. But it's really interesting is he said, if I could go back and just erase the three biggest mistakes that I made as a business owner, I'd have kept more money than I've ever made since then. Meaning his mistakes cost him more money than he's made, you know, afterward. And so if he had only not made those mistakes by thinking a little bit harder about the decision that he had made, he would just be at a completely different trajectory right now. And I would be the same. And so that's a super, super valuable book that everybody needs to buy and read, The Road Less Stupid by Keith Cunningham. And he has a practice called thinking time, where he puts deliberate time into thinking about the decisions that he wants to make on a weekly basis. And he has a very specific set of questions that he asks himself and that he's going to teach you how to ask yourself, so that you can avoid making decisions that might be for a short-term reason. That reason might be logical. It might make a lot of sense. There's a lot of people making a lot of decisions right now and over the past few months with what's been going on here this year in 2020. And I've tend to find in my experience that short-term decisions usually have very bad long-term consequences. At the time, it feels like what's necessary and it's the right decision and what you need to do because it's based on emotion. But if you can step back, maybe put some more time and thought into that and be a bit more strategic and have more patience, you're probably going to come to a different decision that's going to be much better for you in the long run. So yeah, I think from an education standpoint, the most valuable asset that I've ever acquired is my network. It's the people that I've gotten to know, people like you and the other folks that are colleagues and friends in you know the industries that I've been involved in. No bigger doors have been opened. No bigger opportunities have been found than from the ones that have come from the relationships that I have. Beyond that, it's books. It's just books. You know, in the beginning, you don't have a network. You're 20 years old. Who the hell do you know that is of any importance, right? Well, great. Then you go build those relationships virtually with the people on your bookshelf at your local bookstore. And I had cases and cases of books when I was just getting started. And then you go to events and you start shaking hands, and you don't necessarily sit in the event. You sit at the bar and you don't necessarily drink, but you just meet and talk to people and you take an interest in them and what they do. You figure out how to help other people accomplish their goals. One of the best things I ever did was to start my podcast 4 or 5 years ago. I don't sell anything on it. I don't have ad revenue from it. And I should maybe do that. But the whole point that I started that podcast was to have people like you on the show to help you grow your mission and to contribute to your business and your life, and to build a relationship, right? And to serve my audience. And so 4 or 5 years in now, I haven't made a ton of money from that podcast because it's not my business model, but the amount of equity that I've built up from a relationship standpoint, not only with the guests that have been on it, but with my listeners in the audience, is incalculable. The opportunities that have come out of that show from emails or, just equity opportunities in different companies. I've had an opportunity to be an investor in On It because I forged a friendship with Aubrey Marcus. I have an opportunity to be an investor in Click and Grow because I got to know Matthias there. I have an opportunity to invest in a local gun range here in Austin, Texas, the biggest gun range in the state, because I lived in the same building as the guy who started the range. And I got to tell you, it's an awesome business to be in when the world's going crazy. I have an opportunity to be an investor in a CBD company that's growing like wildfire right now, again, just because of friendships. All of those were possible, not because of an ad that I found online, not because of anything else. It was relationships.
Yeah. Well, I will be co-signing that. I say the relationships are the new economy, the new currency. Every big deal that I've closed, I think I can always trace them back to a relationship.
Yep.
So one day you were sitting on the couch, playing games, you said, and all of a sudden a click in your brain.
Yeah, this was 2 years ago this week, June 2018. I'm taking a break from work. I'm playing PUBG, kicking some ass, if there's any PUBG players out there. And I felt a little click in my head, and I was like, that's kind of weird. Didn't really think much of it. And then flew to Aspen the next morning for food and wine with some friends, which was super fun. But I couldn't fall asleep while I was there. I was like, it's kind of weird. Maybe it's the altitude. Maybe something else is going on. Eventually drank enough wine to pass out for a few hours. So got back 3 or 4 days later, tried to go to sleep, could not fall asleep. And I don't mean in an insomnia way. This is a frustrating, I can't fall asleep type thing. This is a physical. It felt like the bridge to sleep in my brain had been severed or cut. And it was one of the scariest sensations that I've ever felt, that you could ever imagine feeling. That went on for 6 or 7 days straight, where I didn't sleep for a single minute for 6 or 7 days. And I could feel my body starting to shut down. And I kind of felt like I was dying. And no matter what I did, I would get to a point of going unconscious, and my body would just pop up and I'd have an adrenaline spike, and that was it. And I'd be up for the rest of the night. So I called my doctor and I told him what was going on. He gave me a prescription for the very first time for Xanax and Ambien. I'm not a big pharmaceutical guy. So I take those and I get maybe 60 minutes of this transient type of sleep. It's not real deep sleep. It's just kind of you're in an altered state of consciousness. And then I would wake up again. And so I would take that medicine 9 or 10 o'clock at night, and I'd wake up at 11:30, and I'd be up for the rest of the night and the rest of the day. And I couldn't think, I couldn't sleep. Within a couple of weeks, those medications started to make me suicidal, which was a really interesting experience, because if you've never felt that, you don't understand how someone could ever feel suicidal. And then when I experienced that for the first time, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. I totally understand how this makes sense now. And that went on for months. I went to every doctor you could think of. Nobody knew what was going on. I just thought I had a nervous breakdown or something along those lines, because it was just all nervous system related symptoms and issues. And the scariest part is that I couldn't find anyone else with a similar story. So when you go on YouTube or Google and you type in your symptoms and you can't find a single other person who has the same symptoms you do on the internet, that's really freaking scary. And it's also scary when you go to 3 or 4 different doctors and they all tell you that they don't know what's going on either, and they've never seen anything like that before. So that squashes your hope. And then you turn to desperation. I couldn't work anymore. I couldn't take care of my son anymore. 3 or 4 months go by. You start to think, am I ever going to be able to live again? Or is this the new norm for me? Am I just going to have to move in with my parents because I'm eventually going to run out of money? And what am I going to do? And so that went on for almost a year. I got invited to an event Aubrey had at his house, and I mustered the strength to go. And I think that was kind of a divine moment. I just kind of wandered around in a haze, the room, and a woman stopped me, and she introduced herself, and she just asked me how I was doing. And I just said, hey, I'm really going through this sleep issue. I haven't been able to fall asleep in 6, 7, 8 months now, and this is what's going on. And her mouth just dropped, and she kind of turned white, and she's like, that happened to me 5 years ago, the exact same thing. I was on stage giving a speech to Microsoft. I walked off. I felt a click in my brain, and I couldn't fall asleep again for a year and almost died. And all of a sudden it was like, here's someone who understood, the first person in the world that understood what I was experiencing, and she had recovered from it and was doing great now. So as you can imagine, I latched onto her in an instant.
Yeah.
And that started an entirely new process. And so for the first year, this went completely undiagnosed, but I had found her, and I started to go through different modalities that had helped her. And what was really interesting about this, Brad, is that, again, we thought it was a nervous breakdown type deal. So I started going to every single therapy that I could go to. If a friend said, why don't you try this? I would go do it. So I'd never done any of that stuff before, but I was introduced to a therapist who walked me through my first Mdma therapy session, which was the single most life-changing event I've ever gone through. I went through 9 ketamine IV sessions. I went through EMDR. I went through transcranial magnetic. I did neurofeedback for months. I did absolutely everything. And
that sounds fun.
It's interesting. Ketamine is something that you can do in a doctor's office now, which I went and did here. And I didn't know what to expect. I wasn't really told what it was going to be like. And I ended up going through the dying experience the first 2 times that I did it, which was absolutely horrifying. You don't expect to be put under an IV and then feel like you're trapped in this other world and in hell and dying over and over again. That was horrific. Came out of that in tears, and knowing that I had to do it 8 more times because Christina, the gal that I'm referring to that went through this already, it took her 9 sessions to get her healed. It was horrible, but I went through it anyway over the next 3 months, did 9 sessions. It didn't help. It didn't work. And that's because eventually my friend JP, the real estate JP that I told you about earlier, took me to lunch one day, and he said, hey, go talk to Dr. Ann Shippey, and you might have a mold infection. I was like, okay. Called up Ann, got an appointment with her, took a blood test for toxic mold. The test went from a scale of 0 to 50. Anything 0 to 5 is okay. Anything above 5 is red and toxic, and you need to have it addressed. The scale topped out at 50. So once we found that out, that was a huge relief, because now we had something to address and to start to go after. And that was the beginning of the second year, which has been a year of recovery. And mold is a really insidious toxin because it grows like crazy in your body, and you have to get, in order to heal, into an environment that is free of mold. And here in South Texas, that's virtually impossible. So the first thing you have to do is move, which is what I did. Moved into a rental property. You're not sure if there's mold in that one or not. You just kind of have to look around and do your best. Spent about 6 months there, wasn't getting better. Had that house tested, that had mold in it. Moved to another house, that house had mold in it. So I've moved 3 times in a year. I've gotten a lot better. So about after 4 or 5 months of detox and addressing the mold, I could finally function and work again. One of the biggest wins that I found was a friend of mine, Hal Elrod. He's got an amazing story, author of The Miracle Morning, amazing human being, went through chemo, and that almost took him out. And one of the best things that he found that helped him was THC for the pain and sleep. And so I tried that, and that was a game changer. That is truly a medicine that allowed me to finally be able to fall asleep again. It was a disassociative that would calm my brain long enough down to go unconscious. So that literally saved my life. And what's really interesting now is I've talked about this publicly. I did a big interview with Aubrey and my doctor on YouTube, and two things happened. One, I accidentally got to go through 20 years of therapy in 12 months, which was unbelievable. So despite the hardships that this has cost me from a financial standpoint and a health standpoint, what I was able to get rid of from, let's just say, a trauma standpoint of having gone through a divorce and being bullied in school and losing money and being defrauded and all of this kind of crazy stuff that you go through in life that had been weighing me down. I got to get rid of all of that. And I'm confident that I would have never done the work or had the courage to go do that work if I hadn't been forced to by this event. And so that was a huge blessing in disguise. The second big blessing in this is that it has allowed me to help serve other people. And we've had 5 friends in Austin in the last 3 or 4 months who are all entrepreneurs, all high achievers, just doing amazing things in the world, all of a sudden get sick and have a toxic mold infection. One of them almost died. He had brain swelling and his brain was bleeding. He runs all of the tech for most of the biggest internet marketers that we all know. And that almost took him out. I've had 3 or 4 friends again in the last few months all call with mysterious symptoms and stuff's going on. And it turns out they went and got tested and they have a toxic mold infection as well. And so it's been a really fascinating experience. Having said all that, you don't want to get to the point where you are forced to go through this kind of work. So one of my missions is to really encourage, especially young entrepreneurs, to go do this kind of work. And I'm really glad that people like myself, Tucker Max, Aubrey, my buddy Josh Bazzoni, all entrepreneurs that have made, $100 million plus, super successful people, A-type, alpha males, are now talking about this stuff publicly. They're talking about the personal work that they're doing, the demons in their closet that they're getting rid of and addressing, and the benefits that's having with them and their families and their relationships, their marriages, and all of that stuff. So it's almost like it's a new set of role models for the next generation, where we're not just talking about money and cars and stuff like that anymore. We're talking about the stuff that actually matters these days, and just to have an awesome life in general. So it's been a fascinating couple of years now.
Yeah, sounds like it, dude. Like, so the click, why would it click? What was the click?
It can cause something called excitotoxicity, where toxins can build up in the brain and do physical damage to your neurons. I don't really know what it is. I don't know if the doctors know what it is, but when they did an EEG on my brain, right where I felt it, which was back here, it showed up as a spot like I had a concussion back there. And so it actually showed up on the brain map, which was really interesting. So, and if you get to a high enough toxin level, Christina's wasn't mold, hers was toxic metals, but it had caused the same type of injury in her brain and the same types of symptoms. So, it can actually cause physical damage.
The MDMA therapy, is that basically like tripping?
Yeah. So it's the drug that you're thinking of that most people do at clubs and raves and things like that. And what MDMA does, and ketamine, well, it's different than ketamine, but the one thing they both have in common is that it allows you to bypass your conscious brain, and your conscious brain is filled with all kinds of protection mechanisms to keep you in the state that you're at, because it wants to keep you alive. And right now you're alive, so it just wants you to keep doing what you're doing. That's why most people have such trouble when they go through traditional talk therapy, and they have to do it for years, because the therapist is having to break their way through all of the conscious barriers that you've built up over a lifetime to manage the trauma that you've been managing and to be the functional human and adult that you are today despite that. Well, MDMA bypasses that, and it just goes straight to the subconscious, and it does it in a really awesome way in the fact that it just dumps all of your brain's serotonin, which is basically your love chemical. And so when you're in that state, you've bypassed the conscious brain, and all you do is feel love and oneness with the world and spirit and whatever else it may be. And so it provides a very safe environment internally in your head to go address really scary, traumatic stuff. So you can go back to the hardest stuff you've ever been through in life. Maybe you've been in the military and you've gone to war and you've seen your buddies blown up or whatever. You're going to do everything you can to not think about that. You're going to turn to alcohol, or you're going to turn to all types of coping mechanisms, and you are not going to want to go back there and address that in any way, shape, or form. Well, MDMA will allow you to do that, and it's not going to be scary. It's going to feel kind of okay with it. It's going to actually maybe feel good, and you're going to, for me, it was like seeing straight through the matrix. You saw through the illusion straight to the code, and you get to see the heart of it, and you get to do it in a frame of love instead of resentment, anger, jealousy, whatever it may be at the core for you. And you get to reevaluate what actually took place. And for me, I went through a shit ton of bullying when I was in middle school that, I thought about every single day of my life since then. And this experience allowed me to go back and really address that in a way where I'm like, you know what? Those were just kids that really didn't know any better. And if they're acting that way at that age, I can't imagine, knowing what I know now, what their home life looks like and where they're learning that behavior from, and why they're taking that out on me and other kids. And I got to reframe that entire scenario and just let it go. And I've since done that twice. Tucker's done it 6 times. He's gone through his challenges as well. He's talked about it on his blog and been very public about it, which is why I'm bringing him up. What
kind of doctor do you have to go to?
So this is done in private. It's illegal in the United States still. They're working on changing that right now. It's being fast tracked through the FDA because all of the clinical trials and tests that they've been doing the past few years are getting such good results. You can go do it down in Mexico or Costa Rica or anywhere like that, or you can do it, potentially with someone who has some experience that you feel safe with, that's essentially going to, look after you while you're laying down on your bed and making sure that you don't go out and do something stupid. And you have to be really careful with this stuff, folks. There's a reason why it's illegal when you get into an altered state, whether it's with MDMA or ketamine or any other kind of drug, similar to ayahuasca or things like that, where you're not in the present moment anymore. Bad things can happen. You can walk out into traffic. You can fall into your pool and drown. Unfortunately, that happened to someone in my network here in the last couple of months. They were having a day for themselves, working on stuff, and it was a beautiful afternoon, and they went into the pool and never came out. So you have to do it under supervision. And with that being said, ketamine you can go do now, but that's a very different experience. With MDMA, you are still in control of what you're thinking. You can still talk to people. You can still get up and move, and it's just an altered state. It's kind of like you're drunk, but in a very different way. The trick to MDMA is the setting and the intention around it. Typically, when people do this in a recreational format, they're out in a club, and the stimulus that they're getting is coming from the outside. Things feel good to touch, people feel good to hug, whatever it may be. From a therapeutic setting, what I do is we wear a mask. We have headphones on with a very specific type of music. And we go into this with intentions of maybe 3 or 4 things that we want answers to or that we want to work on. And we do it with someone that we feel very safe and secure with. And what happens is when you put the mask on and the headphones on and the music, and you isolate yourself from any kind of outside stimulus, is that all of that attention goes inward, and it goes into your head, it goes into your heart, and then you see through the matrix instead of being distracted by everything else outside. So that's a very, very important part of this process. Ketamine is a whole different beast in the fact that it works in a similar way, that it bypasses your conscious brain. It gets into your subconscious, but you can't move your body. You're off on a very different planet. When you think of plant medicines and wild journeys into a different universe, ketamine is very similar to that. But it's working on your brain and doing its thing to settle your brain down. If you've got an excited brain, if you've been through some trauma and your nervous system is always wired up and you can't ever relax, it'll help you kind of rewire that part of your brain and that system. But you're not really thinking much during ketamine. It's kind of doing its work on you instead of you doing the work for yourself. But that is something that somebody can do today in a doctor's office. But the experiences are completely different.
What kind of doctor?
MDMA. Mm-hmm.
What kind
Functional medicine doctor. Usually you can type in, there's ketamine clinics all over the country. We've got a couple here in Austin. I would not recommend ketamine to someone unless you're suicidal or you're going through severe trauma and depression. It has some really good results with trauma and depression and suicidal tendencies. So it's had a lot of success with military vets. If there's nothing else that's worked, you can go do that. With that in mind, again, this is something you do not want to do on your own. Ketamine in the wrong dose is lethal, and there is no antidote. Wow. This is a horse tranquilizer they've used for 60 years. It's very, very safe, but it is a tranquilizer you would get when you go into surgery. It has a very low rate of, any kind of complications. But if you take too much of it, you will die because it'll shut down your nervous system and your respiratory. They cannot raise you back. They can't bring you back from that. You're gone. With that being said, that's something that would never happen in a clinical setting with a doctor who's been doing this for thousands of patients like mine has. And she does it for herself, for her own reasons.
Sounds like the Zoom session got a little ketamine in
it. So that's been the last 2 years. It's been interesting for sure.
Dude, that sounds freaking incredible. Now, when I was younger, I did a little bit of acid, of course, little mushrooms. And I believe to this day that opened some brain function that most people don't do unless they've done acid. But just perspective. So when you said that, I'm thinking, damn, dude, what kind of doctor? I'll go to. I don't have any problems though. That when someone says, where's your struggles? Like, tell me about your struggles. I can't think of any struggles. And again, I mean, I'm sure I've had them, but I can't think. Like when someone said one time, what's your biggest struggle? Dude, I don't know. I don't really think I've ever had any struggles. At all, ever. So do you think that's me just blocking shit out? Or do you think that I've just never had any struggles? And what do you consider a struggle? Like, again, someone said, I was on a podcast. I said, tell me what you felt like when you hit rock bottom. I said, I don't think I've ever hit rock bottom. He's like, well, didn't you talk about being homeless on the beach? I'm like, well, yeah, but it was the beach. I chose to be there. Like, it was just a choice. I didn't want to go home. It was, you're homeless and you're sleeping on a beach, but that's not rock bottom. Like, I just don't think that's rock bottom. So maybe that's the same thing. Like, I've had struggles, but there's been times I couldn't pay child support and I had no money. Is that struggles? What struggles? Those aren't struggles. Those are everyday normal ass life. Like, struggles to me are struggles, like, a click in your brain and you can't sleep and like this happened and that. I've never had anything that happen, but I'd still consider going to do the Mdma therapy. I think you throw the word therapy on there and it makes it better.
Well, there's two ways and experiences you can have. You can have the MDMA party or you can have the MDMA therapy, and they are very two different experiences. And you have to really separate the two and pursue them accordingly to get the result that you want. When it comes to struggles, most entrepreneurs I know have typically gone through some kind of struggle in the past, which is what has given them their drive to succeed, to either prove to themselves or to others. The question, that I'd ask yourself is there something that you beat yourself up on a common basis? I know have always traditionally been quite hard on myself if I've ever made a mistake or whatever I've done wrong, thought about stuff and ruminated on shit that happened years ago. That's definitely a sign that, there's stuff that you need to work on. Have you had trouble connecting with folks? I know after I got a divorce probably 8 years ago now, I just kind of cut myself off from being intimate or, feeling love towards a woman and having that kind of level of trust again. And so MDMA's in that regard been completely life-changing. Right after I did those sessions, probably 6 months later, I found Michelle, the gal that I'm dating now, and most likely the gal that I'll spend the rest of my life with. And that would not have been possible without doing this work, because I still would have had those walls up and all of that armor. But when you go through something like Mdma Therapy, the biggest common takeaway for myself and everybody else that I've talked to who's done this work is a greater sense of empathy for yourself and for others.
That's a big thing, because if people ask me, who do I look for, or what do I look for in a salesperson if I'm going to hire someone, I always say empathy. My empathy is a powerful thing if you can master empathy, because I think I have a high sense of empathy. I always put myself in the customer's shoes, put myself in my wife's shoes. I put myself in those shoes. Is that empathy? I feel for someone. I feel like them.
Yeah, and I think there's different levels of it. You know, anyone who's good at sales, I think, has that trait, but it can be kept within that box. But I think to feel real empathy, at least in my personal experience, to look at people who are struggling or maybe angry at you, or, you know, trolls online who were calling you names in the past, I might have either been dismissive or reactive. And now I just generally have empathy for those people, because I understand it has nothing to do with me. I understand that they're going through a lot of shit in order to have them act that way. And so, you know, for me, it's just been the next level of depth as far as that goes, to a super genuine standpoint now, where in the past it was empathy in order to essentially get something, in order to make a sale or to conduct business. So, yeah.
Well, you used a phrase that I like. I circled it several times: forced change. You know, there's people that they don't know how to react to forced change. COVID, sticking you in your home, quarantine, things like that. The forced change. Sometimes, to me, if you asked me, forced change is, I think, probably some of the best change, because you have no choice. It's forced. And that's usually when you just adapt. But there's some people, they don't adapt. They fight the change. And it's like they don't want to change. And it's, in reality, when you look back 90% of the time, that forced change is the best change. What do you believe?
100%. And, you know, that's something that this experience has forced me to learn and to go through. And I can see the benefits from it now. And it's really interesting to watch the world go through it over the last 4 to 5 months, because most people don't want it. They're not ready for it. They don't know how to handle it. And that's the frustrating part. And the opportunity that we have is we spend our world around amazing people who are into growth and personal development. The average person has never heard of this kind of work or these kinds of resources. They don't have the tools to handle the stress that they're going through right now. And it's unfortunate, but it's also an opportunity. The biggest lesson that I think I've had to learn going through my series of forced change here is to let go of expectations that I have for myself and outcome. That's where all pain and suffering tends to hide, is in expectations that you have for your life and what you think you should own, or where you think you should be at, or what you should have accomplished, or what you should be doing, to have attachment to that. And when you're sick on a couch for a year and a half and you can't really do anything, you can't spend time with your friends, you can't go out drinking, you can't work, you've essentially lost all your money because you're paying payroll still and trying not to fire everybody, but you're not bringing any money in.
We've been there.
Yeah. That brings in, a couple of times for me, that brings in a new level of forced surrender, where it's like, okay, I can't fight right now. I just have to surrender to the circumstance and what I'm going through and be okay with that. And that's a huge opportunity, because it's allowed me to take a step back and, reevaluate what I want to do with the rest of my life, and to kill the momentum and the box that I may have been in a business standpoint, even though I may not have completely enjoyed it anymore, was getting burned out and just doing it because I needed to, again, keep the bills paid. And this gave me an opportunity to, again, go through this entire year of personal growth, to think about what I really want to do for the next 30, 40 years of my life. And it's a true blessing if you choose to see it that way. If you choose to fight it and not surrender to it, then that leads to misery. That leads to alcoholism. That leads to, violent encounters at the home. That leads to all the crap that we're seeing going on domestically these days. And yeah, it's a tough experience to go through, but folks need to know that's going to pass. The best thing that you can do is just accept it, look at it as an opportunity, reframe it. And that's what I'm doing this whole entire time. I'm like, if I could go back and change this last 2 years, would I, even though it's been the hardest 2 years of my life and I've basically lost everything during that. And, don't feel sorry for me when I say that. We still do very, very well and live in a huge house, and we're rebuilding our business and growing again now. So everything is awesome, but, or not. And I think I would go through it again, just because now I get to spend the next 30 or 40 years with this new level of understanding, experience, which allows me to help and serve more people, new insights, new priorities, new relationships, all of it. But I had to lose everything first. I had to lose my health. I had to lose my habits. I had to lose my social circle. I had to lose the business, the money, all of it, in order to wipe the slate clean and start over.
Well, we always look back and say, man, I'm glad that happened. It's funny too, because we're so scared when things are happening. But if you ask anyone where major stuff happened, look at Hal. Okay. Hal Elrod. I think he was on my podcast, or I wasn't on his. I think he was on mine. Anybody that I've ever heard have anything traumatic happen always seems to say, thank God that happened. But while we're experiencing it, we're not prepared. We're not ready. We're freaking out. It's not a good thing. When in reality, sometimes that stuff has to happen for you to understand more about life. You were kind of insinuating where you want to help people, kind of get prepared so it doesn't smack them, without being prepared. So like, how would someone go do this work? And you keep saying work, you're talking about facing your fears, like going to basically unravel all the trauma, face it, talk about it, just deal with it. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. It's the hardest work you can do is that.
So if somebody's out there and they're struggling in their business and they can't get past their limits and their limiting self-beliefs, what would you have them do?
Yeah, I am not the expert or authority on this stuff by any means. I'm still the patient going through it and learning as I go. My mentor through this process has been Aubrey Marcus. He's spent the last 10 years of his life doing this work intentionally. And so he's been the biggest guide I've had through this and resource I've had through this. And so even just popping into his podcast or reading his book and plugging into his world would really help people head down this path. There's very few leaders who are entrepreneurs and who have the emotional intelligence and wisdom that he has at his age that's done the amount of work that he has. In fact, I don't know of anybody else. So I would refer to him and his work as I've really benefited from.
Aubrey Marcus. And folks, the way, even though this has been a podcast where he's kind of reflecting, you already know he's still, kicking ass, taking names. I'm talking about you now.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's got his own podcast. It's called the Mike Dillard Podcast, isn't it?
It is. It
used to be called the Self-Made Man. Didn't you have like courses or something where people can go through and kind of learn how to freaking straighten up, get their shit right, and kick ass?
Yeah. That was after EverGrow. We built selfmademan.com, which was a big e-learning platform like Skillshare for entrepreneurs.
What platform did you use?
That was it. We custom coded it from scratch, $500,000 in code and
what a waste.
Class production.
Yeah.
And I didn't know about you guys then. And 3 months after we launched that, did well, made $250,000 in our first week. About 3 months after we launched it is when the click happened. And that's, if you've ever, as custom code your own software, that's a minimum of $30,000, $40,000 a month maintenance bill and programming and new features and all kinds of fun stuff. And so I eventually, within a few months after getting sick, had to just pull the plug on it basically and let it go. And then just decided to, the goal for that platform for me was to build that up into a business that I could sell that was my next challenge and evolution as an entrepreneur. Is I wanted to have an exit. Just why not? Hadn't done it, wanted to do it. But once I got sick, I realized that was not going to be in the cards for me, and just not going to be the ideal route. And I said to myself, assuming I get well again and I get a second chance at this thing called life, I want to get back to doing what I really love and what I'm really good at, which is teaching, writing, teaching people, and just do that for myself again, for my audience, not worrying about having an exit or anything like that. I just want to get back to being creative and teaching folks. So that's when I changed the name of the podcast.
So where's the content that was in for Self-Made Man?
That is in a mentoring program called Mike Dillard Mentoring that we offer now. It'll probably be up in the next month or two, but we've taken a few thousand people through a year-long curriculum where every single week you get a lesson from myself and the best of the best out of my network when it comes to the entire entrepreneurial journey. So how do you start a business? How do you do Facebook ads? How do you do YouTube ads? How do you do branding? How do you, scale your business? How do you hire an assistant? How do you build culture with a team? Andy Frisella was on here talking about.
He's good at it.
Well, we talked to him about how he built the culture at First Form, right? And then we take people through the investing and finance side. So I walk people through the folks that I've learned, with JP and Adrian, and on the tax side. We walk people through asset protection. We sit down with my asset protection attorney for 3 hours and go through living trusts and wills and how do you make yourself lawsuit proof and all of that. It's essentially
available right now.
It's not. We're in the mix of relaunching it in about a month, but it'll be at MikeDillardMentoring.com.
Dude, I want this right now. I want it right now. And look, folks, if you guys are listening to this and you're struggling, you better be following Mike, or go to MikeDillard.com, enter a newsletter, figure out how to follow him. So when this launches, you can get it. I'm going to get it when it launches. And normally I won't get anything that isn't on Lightspeed, but I can just tell by who you're talking about, the things that you're talking about, the topics that you're talking about, that this information is valuable information. If you guys, I'd almost call it shortcuts. I might even start one eventually called shortcuts. You want shortcuts? This is where it is. Dude, everything you just said right there, even though I'm doing, 8 figures and things seem well and da-da-da-da-da, dude, I still got the same freaking struggles at just another level. I'm still trying to tweak my culture. I call Andy all the time. I'm like, dude, tell me this, tell me that, tell me this. And then he's like, well, do this, do that. And I'm like, damn, I didn't even think of that. Like, if you've got a whole series with all that, that's a mentoring program from
52 lessons, 52 weeks. It's a year-long program, and it's all proprietary content. These aren't interviews. These are full in-studio, 3-camera classes we filmed in virtual VR with the expectation we'd be able to put our PlayStation headset on, and you literally sit in the audience and look around as people are giving their class. So that's what it is. And it's all the stuff, Brad, that is not, when you look at a business and you think about a pyramid basically, or an iceberg, the stuff you see in ads on Instagram and Facebook for the courses that are being sold to you, that's the tip of the iceberg. That's the how to get the customer and create your product. That's the top 10% of the public facing business. The other shit, the 90% that's below the water you don't see, is the stuff that's talked about in that program. And that's the stuff that you and I would be dealing with on a daily basis that we've gone through. 4 of the lessons are the 4 times I've lost over $1 million making mistakes. That's not something you're going to get anywhere else, but that's the most valuable stuff that there is. And so it's really interesting. It's not a blueprint on how to build a 7-figure business. This is how to build a real business as a real entrepreneur, as you and I have for 10, 15, 20 years now, not how to sell a course online. And I think that's the most valuable part of this evolution. If we can give you 600 years of combined experience through these teachers in one, awesome.
Well, if you need Lightspeed, you know where to call.
You got it.
And I can make you a special deal by just, giving me access to the data as well.
Awesome, brother. Thank you.
My pleasure. Hey, man, I appreciate you coming and giving us a little bit of time. This is a wonderful, wonderful podcast. Folks, if you guys want to follow Mike, at Real Mike Dillard on Instagram, MikeDillard.com's probably got everything you got going on, right?
Yep.
Or just freaking Google him because you'll find him everywhere. Man, appreciate you coming out, Mike. And folks, share this out with people. There might be someone that has that going on right now, and this is that divine intervention, is you sharing this podcast out. So I hope you do, Mike. Appreciate you coming out. If you need anything, man, give me a call. I'm glad everything's going. You know, I'm glad you figured it out because, dude, you know, earlier you were like you almost died. Yeah. It was a scary place to be for sure. So I'm grateful as well for the progress we're making, and it continues, but it's going in the right direction, which is awesome. Good, man. That sounds awesome. All right, folks, you heard it right here. As always, share it out and keep it real.